Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Harry Fling Wrestling. I'm your host, Harry Fling, and yes, you asked for it, it's back. Another edition of Superstar Spotlight. It's a show within a show, and it seems like it's gotten a lot of popularity, and I thank you all once again, whether you're a subscriber or just a viewer out there in YouTube land. It means the world to me to know that people are listening to my content, which I like to share with people, and especially wrestling fans out there, and I appreciate any comments and feedback as well. Even if you disagree with me, that's more than okay. Today's Superstar Spotlight features one Jack Swagger, or if you're an AEW fan and you know him outside of WWE, he goes by his real name, Jake Hager. This is a man who should have had a better career. See, as you kind of notice a trend of the people I'm covering in Superstar Spotlight, they're people that should have had better careers than what WWE gave them. Granted that I predominantly watch WWE, though these days, with the way the product's going, it's been very hard to watch and very disengaging, so I tend to watch stuff that's archived footage. So, I thought about doing this one because I'm watching the spring of 2009 leading into the summer. I go on a kick of different eras I like to watch as I drink my Diet Pepsi. And Jack Swagger was definitely featured more often than not in the mid-card, at least. So Jack Swagger is born, his real name is Donald Jacob Hager Jr., but we just call him Jake Hager. So he's a Donald. Born March the 24th of 1982 in Fargo, North Dakota. I actually didn't know he was from North Dakota. I thought he was from the South, like Oklahoma. He's billed from Perry, Oklahoma. Billed from means that they could be coming from anywhere, even like parts unknown. And whatchamacallit, it doesn't have to be that they actually live there. You're billed from, somewhere outside the country, but, you could have a home in Tampa, Florida. A lot of guys, especially in the FCW days, had that be the case for them. So he's billed from Perry, Oklahoma, standing at 6'7", weighing 275 pounds. I'm only going to give you his WWE accolades, because I didn't do any research for AEW, but he's a one-time ECW champion on ECW on Sci-Fi, one-time World Heavyweight Champion, and a one-time United States Champion. So we're going to talk a little about his career and things that kind of went wrong, worked out and didn't work out, and things like that. So Jack Swagger got started with his career, I want to say in 2006. But before that, he was a student at the University of Oklahoma and played football and was a two-sport All-American standout. He played football and then amateur wrestling. I think he did some amateur wrestling even in high school, too. A lot of them start out in high school, maybe middle school. Actually, it says he started amateur wrestling at age 6. So he was really young when he started it, and man, that seems too young for me. I mean, I tried it out when I was like 14 going on 15, but eventually I quit because I couldn't take the physicality anymore. I was in bad shape growing up, and that was my fault. No one to blame but myself. So he was quite the standout, so much so that he was discovered by Hall of Famers Jim Ross and Gerald Briscoe, who were sort of talent scouts in the mid-2000s, even though Jim Ross was the lead play-by-play announcer on Monday Night Raw then, and Gerald Briscoe was just an agent. So they discovered him because Jim Ross is from Oklahoma, and Swagger, I think, eventually moved to Oklahoma later on in his life after growing up in North Dakota for a little while. He went to school there, so Jim Ross lives there, and he went to school there, and Gerald Briscoe is not far from there either. So it all started when he signed with Deep South Wrestling in 2006 after JR and Gerald Briscoe discovered him. But he didn't last in Deep South for very long because he then transferred to the newly christened FCW, the Florida Championship Wrestling Developmental Territory, which later became what it's now known as NXT. FCW was a concept created by John Laurinaitis, who was the Senior Vice President of Talent Relations at the time. And John Laurinaitis selected that location because he liked the nightclubs in Tampa, from what I hear, and he just wanted to go just so he could get his fix of the nightlife or whatever. So it's kind of a stupid reason, and he's not the smartest tool in the shed, Johnny Ace. Let's be real. Jake Hager then adopted the name Jack Swagger. Now, he became the inaugural FCW Florida Heavyweight Champion. That was is a developmental version of the WWE Championship. And that was on February the 15th of 2008, defeating Ted DiBiase Jr. in the tournament finals. And FCW didn't air its first show, I think, until May of 2008, so this was taped like 3 months before. And this was their first show, actually, and he became the inaugural champion. They had a tournament. And FCW lasted from 2008 till about mid to late 2012, and then NXT sort of took over. So, but Swagger wouldn't be long for FCW, as you'll soon find out. He had an undefeated streak, which would actually carry on to the main roster, but under different circumstances. He had an undefeated streak in FCW until he lost the belt to one Sheamus O'Shaughnessy. Yeah, Sheamus was really coming up in the world too, and although he had a faster, more successful push as far as the world title picture is concerned, he was the one to, defeat Jack Swagger in the developmental leagues. Eventually, Hager was called up to the main roster, where he debuted for the ECW brand. ECW on Sci-Fi. It was very watered down, as we know, because it wasn't the original Extreme Championship Wrestling, and the product had just turned PG, so everything was very squeaky clean, so there's no bloodshed or any type of extremism to speak of. He defeated an amateur wrestler by the name of Josh Daniels, just another enhancement talent. Immediately, by the time he got onto the roster and had his debut match, he started feuding with Tommy Dreamer, as Dreamer was the lone ECW original left in the company at the time. Everyone else was gone by then. That year, Balls Mahoney was released in 2008. Stevie Richards was released. Nunzio, I think, might have been released too, or he retired and he got a backstage role eventually as an agent in WWE. So eventually they feuded on and off, and then Swagger eventually defeated Dreamer in an amateur wrestling challenge competition, like November of 2008. I remember this one segment. Swagger cuts a promo, and inside the ring is a table set up with all these extreme relics. You had barbed wire bats, trash cans, the old ECW championship, the classic ECW championship from like the 90s, and then the one that was used from 06 to 08. Not that big, dumbass looking silver clunky WWE watered down version of the ECW title. I hated that belt so much. Mark Henry was the first to hold it, and Ezekiel Jackson was the last to hold it. Oh my God, that platinum belt, it's so ugly. It's probably the ugliest belt, and the belts today are so ugly, and that was just the start of it then. So they should have kept the original ECW championship, the bloodshed version, if you will. If you know, you know. That's what I'm talking about. So he was holding it up and saying, this is all yesteryear, and I wouldn't proudly be talking about that, because those are the decade before was the time to be proud of ECW, in the 90s, not in the 2000s. So yeah, I know he had nothing to do with being proud of being in a new era, but I wouldn't be personally as a fan. But that's because Swagger was told to say that. He wasn't in charge of himself creatively, and he no creative control over his character. Now Swagger, he's an interesting character, because he's an interesting gimmick, because Swagger, his gimmick was that of a high school college jock with an inflated ego, which is comically offset by his goofy disposition and speech impediment when he speaks. So, he's that big dumb jock pretty much, and anytime he'd talk, it'd sound like this. I'm the all-American Jack Swagger. I'm the ECW champion. He was never great at promos. He tried. He got a little bit better in his somewhat of a main event push we'll talk about later, but it wasn't so great. He needed somebody like, he benefited having a manager like Zeb Coulter. I think it was the only manager he had. Oh, he had Vicky Guerrero too. Having a Vicky Guerrero or a Zeb Coulter by his side to speak for him helped him out tenfold, tremendously. His promos, like I said, did slightly improve over time, but never quite up to par with other more talented talkers at that time. So he always was going to be mocked in promos. Like, I remember on draft night in 2009, he was the ECW champion and Cena was the world heavyweight champion. They were having a champion versus champion match for like 2 draft picks, and then he kept making fun of him backstage for calling himself the redundant nickname, the All-American American. I'm the All-American Jack Swagger. Oh, so you're All-American American. American. It was just a stupid feud, but you could tell like Cena was getting the better end of it, and people, if you were the audience laughing, you'd be laughing at Swagger, not with him, not at Cena, but with Cena. Oh, go back and watch that. It was a Raw segment, silly little thing. So let's get back to his time on ECW. Not long after the feud with Dreamer, Swagger turned his attention to the ECW Championship, the lone sole title to be contended for on that brand. He won the #1 contender spot and defeated Matt Hardy for the belt on January the 13th, 2009 episode of ECW on Sci-Fi. He then retained the belt in a successful rematch at the 2009 Royal Rumble against Matt Hardy. That was the night Matt Hardy turned heel. That was supposed to be Christian, but that's another story for another time. That's neither here nor there. Swagger also had an undefeated streak in ECW, much like he did in FCW. Only Sheamus wasn't there to be the one to end it. Fit Finlay ended it. And Finlay was being managed by Hornswoggle at the time, so it was more about putting over Hornswoggle than Finlay. And it was more a comedic act, those two. So Swagger defeated Finlay to retain the ECW Championship at No Way Out 2009. However, Swagger did not defend the belt at WrestleMania 25. He wasn't even on the card. But he was one of the Lumberjacks in the dark match for the Unified Tag Team Championship. That was supposed to be on the card, but Kid Rock took up 10 minutes of everyone's time. So Miz and Morrison versus Carlito and Primo had to be moved to the dark match, which became a bonus feature on the WrestleMania 25 DVD. It was a bonus match, dark match. Should have had Sunday Night Heat for a pre-show match, but they weren't doing that then, or free-for-all, whatever, kickoff. So Swagger was one of the Lumberjacks, and he's supposed to be a world champion. So what sense does that make? And ECW really didn't get represented at WrestleMania 25 unless you count Money in the Bank that year with Finlay and Mark Henry being in it. You could tell they were really done with the brand, and they were about, it wasn't long for this world. Because less than a year later, come WrestleMania 26, there was no ECW brand to speak of. Swagger started feuding with Christian over the ECW Championship. In fact, when Christian returned officially to WWE in February 2009, he called out Swagger, made fun of his speech impediment and everything about him, his goofiness, what have you. Set up a match on February the 24th, 2009, but Swagger beat Christian clean. He beat him clean to retain the belt, which didn't make sense because I think that was Christian's first match back, and he's challenging for a world title. He should have won it right then and there. Oh, man, it was such screwy booking in this early days of the PG era. Great matches, but decision-making had left something to be desired. It was very questionable. Eventually, Christian defeated Swagger for the belt at Backlash 2009, ending his reign at 104 days. And it was a good reign because Swagger actually looked strong for the most part. And you could tell they were going to push him as like the next Kurt Angle, but I had to stop myself there when I was saying Kurt Angle because Kurt Angle's a 5-tool superstar. He can channel any emotion from the crowd and with whomever he's working with in the ring. Whether they're happy, sad, angry, hysterical, whatever. And his promo skills are above average. They're over par. They're, what's the word? His promo skills are, way above average. He set the bar for promo skills for other people to follow. And, every little nuance that Kurt Angle does, I think he's one of the greatest of all time. So Swagger had a lot of big shoes to fill, and I don't think he's going to I never thought he was going to fill those shoes exactly. So I always called him a poor man's Kurt Angle, and he really was. But he wasn't a bad worker in the ring. He was actually fun to watch, especially loved that gut-wrench powerbomb. This finesse was so great for a guy 6'7". What's his stats again? His measurements, 6'7", 275. He sure was agile for a guy that size. Most guys don't run as fast as he could. So he was able to work with smaller guys like Rey Mysterio and Evan Bourne and make them look good in addition. So, getting back to 2009, the spring now, Swagger unsuccessfully challenged for the ECW Championship at 3 consecutive pay-per-views before being traded to Raw in June of 2009. They had a 15-superstar trade amongst the 3 brands. So each brand got 5 new superstars from the other brands. So it was Judgment Day 09, Swagger lost in his rematch to Christian. Extreme Rules 09, he lost in the Triple Threat Hardcore match. Christian and Tommy Dreamer, who eventually won the ECW title. And then he lost in the Championship Scramble for the ECW title at the Bash. And that was Christian, Dreamer, Finlay, and Mark Henry, I believe. And then the trade came the next night. So Swagger was moved to Raw the very next night after the Bash in 2009. And he then feuded with MVP, another mid-carder who had just been drafted earlier that year to Raw from SmackDown. But he lost in their blow-off match at SummerSlam 2009. Swagger actually had a match. They had MVP. What was that show MVP used to have? The VIP Lounge. So, he brought out, sort of, Swagger claimed he was an MVP in the sports world, more so than Montel Vontavious Porter. And so they talked and, just sort of bragged about all their accolades and talked trash to one another, saying, I'm better than you, such and such, typical wrestling fanfare, trash talking. And it then set up a match on Raw on July the 13th of 2009 in which Swagger beat MVP clean. I don't like when a heel gets a clean win right away because the babyface then looks foolish. You have to protect both people, so you kind of need those count out and DQ wins. Not be at a flat finish. It would have been bad the other way too if MVP had won. If you're going to start a feud, don't have a clean finish right away. They shouldn't have done that with Christian on ECW. Don't beat him so cleanly right away. Have these false finishes on free TV, but the pay-per-view have the definitive finish, and that's the blow-off match. So their blow-off match came at SummerSlam 2009 when MVP pinned Jack Swagger. Swagger did not have a very successful time on Raw the rest of that. He just sort of floundered in the mid-card, lower mid-card. He was on a Survivor Series team. He challenged for the U.S. title on a few occasions. But he eventually qualified for Money in the Bank at WrestleMania 26, which, by the way, was the last time Money in the Bank was ever held at WrestleMania to this day. So it's been 16 years since we've seen a Money in the Bank match at WrestleMania, because that was the year it became its own pay-per-view, that July. It was the only 10-man Money in the Bank ladder match to date, and that's the most competitors we've ever had, and it was a very cluttered match according to Dave Meltzer. I thought it was a little cluttered at times, but it was fun to see all these people get on the card, and just seeing what direction this was going to go and not knowing what direction it was going to go was very fun to watch, too, as a fan. So Jack Swagger defeated Christian, Matt Hardy, Kofi Kingston, Drew McIntyre, Kane, Evan Bourne, Dolph Ziggler, Shelton Benjamin, and MVP. Wow, I actually remembered all 10 men in that match. Benjamin wasn't long for WWE's. He'd get released a few weeks later. MVP would sort of fall down the card, and everyone else kind of remained the same. I thought maybe McIntyre was going to win because he was being heavily pushed as Mr. McMahon's future world champion. Kofi was kind of on a nice push coming off the heels of that feud with Randy Orton, so there was potential for him to win. Also, I could have thought Christian and Matt Hardy just because of their longevity in the company at the time, especially Christian. So it was a complete shock. For someone who hadn't really done shit for quite some time, they're finally giving him this other push, and it really came out of nowhere. I still don't know why to this day. So, naturally, you got Mr. Money in the Bank over here. He tried to cash in on Cena the night after WrestleMania 26 on Raw. Cena was the WWE champion, just beat Batista the night before, but that didn't last long. So he was able to, he cashed in, but Cena wasn't incapacitated enough, and the bell never sounded, so the ref was never able to call a match. So Swagger saved it for a future date, but the future date would be the next night at the SmackDown taping. Swagger on March the 30th of 2010, which would air April 2nd of 2010. It was Friday Night SmackDown, but taped on Tuesday, aired on Friday. He cashed in Money in the Bank on the current World Heavyweight Champion at the time, Chris Jericho, after Jericho was speared by Edge beforehand. Swagger subsequently joined the SmackDown brand as he was their world champion and started feuding with people on that brand, though not right away. He did randomly have a successful title defense against Randy Orton, although Orton had no intentions of going to SmackDown. He wasn't drafted to the Blue brand until a year later, so I don't remember why that feud came about, and that blew off at Extreme Rules in 2010 in the Extreme Rules match at the titular pay-per-view. Now he feuded with someone who was actually on the SmackDown brand at the time, The Big Show. Now this is kind of a weird feud. Swagger once again brought out all his accolades to the ring. It was like a May 2010 episode of SmackDown. And he's got all his trophies, his medals, and everything else he won, amateur wrestling and football, whatever, in Oklahoma, at University of Oklahoma. He even brought out a storyline, a kayfabe dad, Mr. Jack Swagger Sr., played by none other than WCW legend Bunkhouse Buck. I forgot all about Bunkhouse Buck until I forgot he was ever in WWE until that brief time. It was like a one-day contract, I think. It was the only appearance, I think, of his, maybe one other time. He played Jack Swagger Sr., Bunkhouse Buck did. Big Show interrupted and ruined this ceremony or whatever, where Swagger was bragging about all his accolades. And Swagger got, what else? So Big Show just attacked both men and destroyed the whole ring. And then It led to a match at the inaugural Over the Limit pay-per-view in 2010. Over Limit replaced Judgment Day that year for a few years anyways. Swagger got DQ'd in that World Heavyweight title defense against the Big Show. That was a shitty match anyways. Swagger then lost the belt the following month at the inaugural Fatal 4-Way, which was the sole pay-per-view of that name to this day. Fatal 4-Way in June of 2010 at the Nassau Coliseum on Long Island. My friend Weston and I were there, so I got to see it live. Swagger actually lost the belt to Rey Mysterio. It was a Fatal 4-Way match also involving CM Punk and The Big Show. Swagger had a rematch at Money in the Bank, the inaugural Money in the Bank, which is still around today, in 2010, in a masterful, technical, and speedy bout against Rey Mysterio, but did not regain the belt. And that was the end of his main event push. Actually, I think Dave Meltzer might have given that match 4 stars. It was one of the best matches, a lot of wrestling critics say, of 2010. So go back and watch that match. Jack Swagger versus Rey Mysterio, Money in the Bank 2010. Not long after that, Rey Mysterio retained the belt in that match. Kane came out and cashed in his Money in the Bank in even quicker fashion than Swagger did a few months earlier, and beat Rey for the World Heavyweight title. So, the main event push ended. Swagger then adopted a mascot played by Chavo Guerrero named the Swagger Soaring Eagle. It was just basically the United States' state bird. The country's birds. Symbol, what do you call it? I say state bird, but we're not talking about a state here. We're talking about our country. It's our country's national symbol, the bald eagle. Basically a bald eagle costume. This was Chavo Guerrero flapping his wings, the Swagger Soaring Eagle. The mascot was, basically there just to help get him over in some silly fashion, but did not achieve much success as far as getting another world title is concerned, though he did somehow make his way into the Intercontinental title picture, where it was predominantly run by Kofi Kingston and Dolph Ziggler. Swagger and Ziggler were kind of on-again, off-again partners throughout this time, too, just being on the same brand. Swagger did not ever win the Intercontinental title, though he tried in a ladder match at TLC in 2010. Swagger then became Michael Cole's personal trainer for WrestleMania 27. See, a year before he was winning Money in the Bank, and now he's a cornerman. So I have to say, this was one of the shittiest world titles I had ever seen. Jack Swagger, he looked so weak. He was getting beat up by basically everyone whom he feuded with. He had no credibility. We couldn't take him seriously, and he was never put in that position again. Well, he tried, and we're going to get to that, but it just seemed like a waste of time. They pulled the trigger, I think, much too early. This was not the time to do it. He needed more time to develop, and it was rushed, and he just threw the guy under the bus and asked him to carry this huge weight, and of course he couldn't, and that's WWE's fault entirely, not any fault of Swagger's. It's one thing if a wrestler can't carry themselves and make themselves look good, but at this time period you had writers and everything so overly scripted, as you currently do now, but maybe less so then. And he could have, had a little bit more dignity, and I think he lacked that a lot, and that led to that, shitty ass world title run, and led to him just looking foolish overall. And it was hard to take Swagger seriously after. He was just more a comedic character. He was more comic foil, comic relief. That's all he was. So that's what led to him being involved in the Michael Cole Jerry Lawler feud, which I talked extensively about in another video, so I'm not going to waste a lot of time on that one. He did receive a beating, predictably, at the hands of Stone Cold Steve Austin, naturally. He was then drafted back to Raw in the 2011 supplemental draft on WWE.com. Usually that would happen on Tuesday, the Tuesday after Raw at around noontime, the supplemental draft every year. That was the last one for a while. Cole eventually insulted Swagger so much that Swagger decided to end the partnership, and rightfully so. Then he started feuding with a guy much smaller than him, not Rey Mysterio, but Evan Bourne. They had actually some good matches on Superstars, when they were both on the Raw brand from late 09 to early 10. But then they didn't feud again until Swagger came back to Raw, because Bourne was only on ECW and Raw and never was officially a SmackDown superstar. So they had a match at Capital Punishment on June 19th. Swagger actually should have won that one because, Capital Punishment was a patriotic-themed pay-per-view, and you have the All-American American. But I guess WWE didn't decide to go in that direction that night. And he did compete in his second Money in the Bank ladder match at the titular pay-per-view, but was unsuccessful. That was where Alberto Del Rio won Money in the Bank that year. Then he started milling around in the U.S. title picture and subsequently feuding / teaming with Dolph Ziggler, because then he adopted a manager in the form of Vicky Guerrero. After enough convincing and after enough teaming with Ziggler, Ziggler's okayed, Vicky to have another client. Much like guys like Bobby Heenan and Jimmy Hart had multiple clients, Mr. Fuji back in the day. He thought, why can't Vicky Guerrero do the same? Paul Heyman now. So Vicky Guerrero was now the manager for Jack Swagger, in addition to Dolph Ziggler. And I think Dolph and Vicky weren't exactly boyfriend and girlfriend anymore. It was just business partners. So I'm trying to think. Yeah, Swagger and Ziggler teamed up together. Team Swagler, they were called, trying to put them on even keel. We know Ziggler was the better member of the team, so I didn't like that partnership in the sense that you're trying to put him on an even keel. Swagger needed to rebuild his image. And he tried. So they teamed together and tried to take the tag titles from Air Boom, Kofi Kingston, and Evan Bourne, but were unsuccessful. But then, by a stroke of luck, Swagger won the United States Championship in January of 2012 when he defeated an injured Zack Ryder. Ryder was going into this match injured. He'd been chokeslammed off the stage. No, he'd been chokeslammed by Kane, off the stage, and his ribs were all bruised, and the interim GM at the time, John Laurinaitis, had no sympathy for Zack Ryder and made him defend his belt, and Ryder lost the belt to Swagger. Very uneventful run for Swagger as U.S. champion. So they were trying to put the world title on Ziggler, at least push him in that direction, so they want to put the mid-card title back on Ziggler, whom Ryder defeated. And of course, Vicky was in the corner of Swagger at the time. Swagger had a successful title defense against Justin Gabriel randomly at the Elimination pay-per-view in February of 2012, and I think that was kind of the only title defense I remember seeing him have. Zack Ryder certainly didn't get a rematch. It wouldn't be long then he lost the United States title to Santino Marella on March the 5th of 2012, leading into WrestleMania 28. Then, of course, Swagger was on Team Johnny, that took on Team Teddy at WrestleMania 28. My friend DJ and I were there for that. Great time. Great times. And, so he was on Team Johnny. But being on Team Johnny, he got a Mania victory, but it didn't lead to anything better than that. So I'm trying to think what else. So, yeah, Swagger and Ziggler then decided to team up again and take on Kofi and this time R-Truth for the tag titles. But, again, very unsuccessful. Then finally, there was a lot of bickering. There was a lot of infeuding between Ziggler and Swagger, and Vicky had enough and decided, you two have a match. Whoever wins, you stay with me. And Ziggler won, so the relationship between Vicky and Swagger was over. Basically Swagger went on a losing streak after that and then just took some time off. I just think the character was kind of worn out and just he was burnt out and just needed a break. So he finally reemerged on the scene in February of 2013 with Zeb Coulter, the former Uncle Zebekiah, Dutch Mantel, real name Wayne Keown. Uncle Zebekiah was a manager for Jacob and Eli Blue in 1995 and then Justin Hawk Bradshaw in 1996. So he hadn't seen Dutch Mantel in like 17 years in the company. He returned as Zeb Coulter to manage Jack Swagger, and the All-American gimmick was over and done with. Now, this was a supposed American hero that was who advocated anti-immigration beliefs, and I think he was influenced by this Republican in the news at the time, Glenn Beck. I don't follow politics a whole lot, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't even like this gimmick because it was very prejudiced, the whole don't tread on me thing and, kicking people out of the country. That was an issue that actually happened in real life, like in 2005, where people were worried about immigration, people from other countries taking jobs from Americans, or something to that effect. So the storyline was too late, but it was a storyline that really didn't need to happen. So just as easily they could have done without it, but he could have been a more American hero. I don't know. He could have done the gimmick without targeting immigrants or, minorities or anything like that. That part he really could have done without. So, but he just could have been another heel, just saying, just being proud of his accomplishments, but could have been the All-American on a more serious level, not the goofiness that came with it, if you catch my drift, but take out the whole don't tread on me part. So yeah, he won the Elimination Chamber in a shocker in the titular match at Elimination Chamber 2013. and then was the #1 contender for Alberto Del Rio's World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania. However, yeah, he was supposed to mock the Tea Party movement. That's who Glenn Beck was. So he's supposed to be a Tea Partier. And I'm liberal. I'm very liberal. I'm a Democrat, so I'd be very against them right from the get-go. Del Rio all the way in this feud. Unfortunately, Swagger was caught with a lot of marijuana several weeks before. He was traveling like an ounce of weed on him, and he got pulled over. And weed was still very illegal at the time. And he was pulled over. He had a mugshot and everything. And WWE obviously... he was very upset, obviously furious at Jake Hager for this, and that's enough to get a 30 days. I don't think he got a suspension, but his push was gonna get derailed. Let's just say that. At Mania, he was driven out during, you know, when the promo package is shown for the videos leading up to the feud. That was shown. Swagger and Coulter were being driven out on a golf cart, and their music played while they were already in the ring. Like, that's how little they cared about Swagger after, because he fucked this one up. You know, he got caught with weed, and kind of like what happened to RVD and Sabu in summer of 06, and that led to RVD losing both his world titles. Now, Swagger's not even going to win the world title, and he didn't, predictably. Del Rio retained with the cross arm breaker, and that was that. And, yeah, Swagger didn't really do much after that. Let's see. Trying to think. Yeah, he kind of slid down the card. He went from main event push to mid card, but then he formed the Real Americans with Antonio Cesaro. Zeb Coulter threw a curveball because Cesaro is actually Swiss, Italian, European descent, but Coulter claimed that he came to America the proper way. You know, he filled out his green card or whatever and got his passed the citizenship test, and that was used to add fuel to the fire in the storyline. So you're against all immigrants, but you have this guy who's not from the U.S. as your tag team partner, and they're calling themselves the Real Americans, just like Hulk Hogan's old theme, Real American by Rick Derringer. So they tried to, you know, challenge for tag belts, but didn't. Were very unsuccessful. Wasn't that great a run. Then they finally split up after WrestleMania 30 because then Cesaro won the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal and then left Swagger and Coulter for Paul Heyman. That should have been a push for Cesaro, but wasn't, but we're not here to talk about that. His final feuds were, you know, ended up seeing Jack Swagger turn face for once. He's never been a babyface until late 2014. He feuded with the Russian, a real Bulgarian actually, in real life, Rusev. Swagger and Coulter then feuded with Rusev and Lana. So Swagger challenged Rusev, I think at like TLC in 2014 for the US title, but didn't manage to win. We the People actually became a slogan that all the crowd was getting behind them saying. So he had a shirt with the, you know, with your right hand traced over it, which is like what you're supposed to do for the Pledge of Allegiance. We the People, something like that. So you could tell the fans were really buying into it. Yeah, and basically, yeah, that was that. As I'm looking at what else he did after that, just kind of little feuds, anything that's kind of not accounted for. I think his last feud was with Baron Corbin, if we go all the way to 2016. Yeah, so it was October of 2016 was Swagger's last match. It was he lost to Baron Corbin on October 9th at No Mercy, and then on the October 18th episode of SmackDown. And then he was released in March of 2017, and he was not happy with his overall run and wished things had gotten better, and I kind of wish things had gotten better for Swagger as far as that run was concerned in WWE from 06 to 17, if you count his DSW days, Deep South. But really, you could have made something out of this man, and you could have had a manager with him the whole time, even put him with Paul Heyman. Paul could have gotten him over greatly. Not have him talk a whole lot, but make him look as serious as possible. See, they made him too goofy, and that's what killed him. Goofy characters aren't bad, but for a guy who's such a talented worker in the ring, he deserved better. So apparently he's retired now from professional wrestling as of 2025. He went to MMA for a while. I think he tried UFC, but I don't know, he didn't really last long there. Now he's into something called slap fighting, which I don't know much about. Just slapping. Seems kind of ridiculous, just the name of it. But what do I know? This has been another great edition of Harry Fling Wrestling. I'm your host, Harry Fling, and until next time, everybody, bye-bye.